The holographic display on the command bridge of the Imperator Draconis cast an eerie blue glow across High Marshal Forlag's scaled features. His eyes narrowed as he studied the rotating image of Xylos, a verdant jewel suspended in the void, rich with the tellurium X that powered their empire's war machines. "This world will fuel our expansion for a century," Forlag announced to the gathered captains. The preliminary reports show a primitive ecosystem. No significant resistance expected. Captain Corvus stood rigid among his peers, but while they nodded in eager agreement, his mind raced with doubts. Lyra's final transmission from the reconnaissance mission played in his memory. Distorted screams, massive shadowy forms moving with impossible speed, and her voice, usually so confident, cracking with terror. Something's wrong with this planet. It's like everything is connected, watching us. The transmission had ended with a sound that still haunted Corvus's dreams. Not quite animal, not quite machine. A resonant, world-shaking roar. "Captain Corvus," Forlag's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your immortals will establish the landing zone, secure the perimeter, and protect the extraction teams." High Marshal Corvus stepped forward, ignoring the disapproving hisses from his fellow officers. With respect, Lieutenant Lyra's final reports contained disturbing anomalies. The environmental readings were unstable, and her team was completely lost. Forlag's lip cut. Lieutenant Lyra was inexperienced. Her equipment malfunctioned. His voice hardened. "Are you questioning Imperial intelligence, Captain? Or perhaps you lack the courage for this mission?" The insult stung as intended. In Cthar culture, courage was everything. "No, High Marshal," Corvus replied, straightening. "The immortals stand ready." Later, alone in his quarters, Corvus reviewed Lyra's partial data again. She hadn't been inexperienced, she'd been brilliant. A xenobiologist who'd volunteered for military service to study frontier worlds. And she'd been his friend, perhaps his only true one in the rigid hierarchy of the Cthar Empire. "What did you find down there, Lyra?" he whispered to the corrupted files. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Valerius, entered with a sharp salute. "The battalion is prepping, sir. 1,000 of our finest, as ordered. And our intelligence on the landing zone." Valerius shifted uncomfortably. "Minimal, sir. The reports have been edited. Most of Lieutenant Lyra's data was classified by the High Marshal's office." Of course it was. Forlag wanted his tellurium X without complications. "Sir." Young Sergeant Zara stood at the doorway, her ceremonial armor still gleaming from lack of real combat. "The troops are asking about the reconnaissance team. They've heard rumors." Corvus regarded her, so eager, so certain of the Empire's invincibility. "Tell them it was equipment failure, Sergeant. Nothing the immortals can't handle." The words tasted bitter on his tongue. As the dropped ships detached from the Imperator Draconis, Corvus watched Xylos grow larger through the viewport. From orbit, it seemed peaceful. Vast green continents swirled with white clouds. But something about its beauty felt wrong, like a predator's perfect camouflage. "Immortals," he called over the comm, his voice echoing in 1,000 helmets. "For the Empire." The soldiers responded with the traditional battle cry, but Corvus remained silent, his eyes fixed on the approaching storm clouds below. Something in him already knew this was not conquest. This was feeding time, and they were not the predators. The dropped ships broke through Xylos' atmosphere with a thunder that shook the reinforced hulls. Rain lashed the viewports, and a bolt of lightning briefly illuminated a landscape that bore no resemblance to the temperate grasslands described in the briefing. Instead, a dense jungle stretched in every direction. Massive trees with pulsing, bioluminescent veins, tangles of vines that seemed to writhe even without wind, and a thick mist that reduced visibility to mere meters. Atmospheric readings unstable, the pilot reported. Heavy interference with navigational systems. "Find us solid ground," Corvus ordered, watching as water streamed down the hull in rivulets that seemed to move with purpose, converging into patterns before dispersing. The ships descended into a clearing barely large enough to accommodate them. The moment the doors hissed open, the assault on Corvus's senses was immediate. His helmet's filters struggled to process the air, thick with unknown spores and a sickeningly sweet scent that made his instincts scream in warning. "Establish the perimeter," he ordered. "Full environmental protocols. No one removes any armor components." The Immortals moved with practiced efficiency, securing the landing zone while engineers deployed the prefabricated command center. But Corvus noticed their movements becoming increasingly tentative as the alien environment registered. This was not what they had trained for. "Captain," Valerius approached, his armor already collecting a thin film of greenish moisture. "Communications with the Imperator are degrading. We're getting signal bounce from something in the atmosphere." "Keep trying," Corvus said, "and send out the scout drones." The drones lasted precisely 7 minutes before their signals were lost. Sergeant Zara returned from the eastern perimeter, her usual confidence dimmed. "Sir, there's something strange about the vegetation. It's moving, not with the wind, deliberately." "Show me," Corvus ordered. At the edge of the clearing, Zara pointed to a cluster of fern-like plants. As they watched, the fronds slowly curled away from the Cthar troops, like fingers withdrawing from a hot surface. "It's happening with all the plants near our position," Zara said. "And there's more. The ground feels—" "I know this sounds absurd, sir, but it feels like it's breathing." Before Corvus could respond, a piercing scream cut through the comm. A perimeter guard staggered into view, clawing at his armor where a vine-like growth had somehow bypassed the seals and wrapped around his arm. The plant pulsed with a sickly light as it tightened. Valerius moved with swift efficiency, deploying a laser cutter to sever the vine. The plant released a high-pitched wail as it fell away, a sound no plant should make. "Get him to medical," Corvus ordered, but it was already too late. Where the vine had touched, the soldier's armor had partially dissolved, and the skin beneath was turning black, spreading visibly even as they watched. The soldier convulsed and collapsed. Within minutes, he was dead, his body consumed from within by whatever the plant had injected. "Full biohazard protocols," Corvus commanded, his voice steady despite the horror he felt. "Nothing touches our armor. Nothing." That night, if the perpetual twilight of Xylos's dense canopy could be called night, Corvus stood at the edge of the camp, watching the jungle. The bioluminescence had intensified, creating an otherworldly landscape of blues and greens. Beautiful, if not for the knowledge that everything here seemed engineered to kill them. "Sir," Zara appeared at his side. "The men are talking. They say this place is cursed." "The Cthar Empire doesn't believe in curses, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, what happened today?" She hesitated. "I've studied all known toxic flora in the database. Nothing acts like this. It's like the plant recognized our armor as a threat and developed a countermeasure on contact." Corvus was about to dismiss her concerns when a distant sound stopped him. A deep, resonant call that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The same sound from Lyra's final transmission. In response, the jungle's light dimmed momentarily, then brightened like a heartbeat. "It's communicating," Corvus whispered. "Sir," he turned to Zura, realization forming. "Wake Lieutenant Valerius. We need to move our position. Now." But High Marshal Forlag ordered us to hold this landing zone for the extraction teams aren't coming, Corvus said with sudden certainty. "Not until we understand what we're facing." That night, 3 more soldiers died, 2 from encounters with the increasingly aggressive flora, and 1 simply disappeared while moving between perimeter stations, leaving only a boot partially melted into the soil. By morning, they'd established a new encampment on rocky terrain where the vegetation was sparser. Corvus finally made contact with the Imperator Draconis, the signal intermittently clear through the atmospheric interference. "High Marshal," Corvus reported, "we've encountered severe biological hazards. The ecosystem is actively hostile, with flora demonstrating coordinated attacks and adaptive strategies against our technology." Forlag's holographic image flickered with static, but his displeasure was evident. "You were to secure the landing zone. Captain," not abandon it at the first sign of resistance. Resistance, sir? Corvus couldn't keep the edge from his voice. We've lost 4 men to plants. The jungle is alive in ways our intelligence never indicated. I recommend postponing the extraction mission until... Your recommendations are noted, Captain. Forelag cut in coldly. And rejected. Your failure to hold position will be addressed upon your return. You have new orders. Proceed to coordinates being transmitted now. Our sensors have detected high concentrations of Tellurium X in that region. The coordinates appeared on Corvus's display, a location deeper into the jungle, in a territory even more dense than what they'd already encountered. Sir, with respect, we need more information about what happened to Lieutenant Lyra's team before we... Lieutenant Lyra's mission is classified, Forelag snapped. You have your orders. Captain, I expect compliance. The transmission ended abruptly. Corvus stood in silence, the weight of command pressing down on him like never before. Sir, Valerius questioned, having heard everything. What are your orders? Corvus studied his second-in-command's face, then glanced at Zara and the gathered officers. They were all watching him, waiting. Behind them, the enlisted immortals were checking equipment, repairing armor damaged by the corrosive environment, their movements betraying a growing unease. Prepare to move out, Corvus finally said. But we do this my way. Full defensive formation. Nothing touches the ground that doesn't have to. We move slow. We move careful. As the battalion advanced through the increasingly dense jungle, Corvus noticed a pattern. The vegetation didn't just react to their presence. It anticipated their path, growing denser in the direction they needed to travel, forcing them to cut through increasingly resilient barriers of alien flora. It was learning, or being directed. By midday, they encountered their first true predator, a pack of creatures that moved like liquid shadow through the undergrowth, visible only by the disruption they caused in the air like heat shimmer. Fast, intelligent, and coordinated, they struck at the weakest points in the Cthar armor: joints, filters, sensor arrays. 2 more soldiers died before the creatures retreated, seemingly communicating with high-frequency sounds that made the Immortals' audio system screech with feedback. They knew exactly where to hit us, Valerius said grimly, inspecting a deep groove where one creature's claws had nearly penetrated his armor at the joint. This is wrong, Zara whispered, her earlier eagerness entirely gone. It's like the whole planet is fighting us. Corvus paused, her words triggering a memory. During one of their late-night discussions, Lyra had theorized about ecosystem intelligence, biospheres that evolve collective defense mechanisms, where individual organisms function like cells in a larger entity. Captain, when the scout team called out, "We've found something." Something was the remains of a camp, Lyra's camp. The prefabricated shelters were half consumed by the jungle, twisted metal frameworks wrapped in pulsing vines. Equipment lay scattered and partially dissolved. Search for survivors, Corvus ordered, knowing even as he said it that they would find none. Instead, they found a data recorder, its casing remarkably intact despite everything around it having been corroded or consumed. When activated, it projected Lyra's final log entries. Her holographic form appeared, disheveled, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and scientific fascination. The ecosystem here isn't just alive. It's aware, she said, her voice crackling with static. Everything is connected through a fungal network extending throughout the planet. It's like a neural net, processing information, learning from our presence. The recording jumped ahead, damaged segments lost. Discover what I believe is a node of the planetary consciousness. A massive structure, organic, but with properties unlike anything in our databases. It's beautiful and terrifying. Another jump. Try to communicate, but we're viewed as an infection. The planet is mobilizing antibodies against us. That's what the predators are, targeted immune responses. And it's getting worse. The image destabilized, Lyra's voice becoming desperate. If you're receiving this, do not send more troops. Xylos is not just a planet. It's an entity. We've provoked it, and now it's waking up. God help anyone still here, when it fully awakens. The recording ended with that same resonant roar, louder now, and the image of something massive moving behind Lyra before the feed cut to static. Silence fell over the assembled soldiers. "We need to abort this mission," Valerius said quietly. "Return to the Imperator and quarantine this entire world." "Forlag won't authorize it," Corvus replied, his mind racing. "Not with the Tellurium X readings. He'll sacrifice every one of us for that resource." "Then what do we do, sir?" Zara asked. Before Corvus could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. Not the subtle breathing motion they'd felt before, but a violent shudder that sent cracks racing through the rocky terrain they'd thought was safe. From the fissures, a luminescent mist began to rise. Spores, Corvus realized with horror. The same spores their filters had been struggling to block since landing. "Move," he shouted. "Back to the landing zone." But as they retreated, the jungle ahead had transformed. What had been passable terrain hours before was now a wall of intertwined growth, barring their path. And from all around came that sound again, the roar, but now it was joined by 1,000 smaller voices, chirps and whistles and hisses, a symphony of hostility. The planet was fully awake, and they were trapped in its immune system. The next hours were chaos. The Immortals fought a desperate retreat through a landscape that actively reshaped itself to impede them. The shadow predators returned in greater numbers, joined by other creatures. Massive arthropods with acid-spraying appendages, flying swarms of needle-like organisms that sought out the smallest gaps in armor. Corvus watched his elite force decimated by an enemy they couldn't effectively fight. Conventional tactics meant nothing against a battlefield that was itself alive and intelligent. By nightfall, they'd lost over 200 soldiers. The survivors had formed a defensive circle on a rocky outcrop, the vegetation unable to gain purchase on the stone, but visibly attempting to crack it with probing roots. "Captain," Valerius's voice was grim as he approached. "Long-range communications are completely gone. The spores have infiltrated our systems. They're growing inside the equipment." Corvus stared at the corroded communicator. Tiny filaments of fungal growth pulsed with the same rhythm as the lights in the jungle around them. "We need to adapt," he said finally. "If this planet wants to treat us as an infection, then we'll act like one. Find ways to mask our presence." Under Corvus's direction, they began to modify their approach. Zara discovered that a certain red sap neutralized the corrosive effects of some vegetation. They adjusted their armor, covering recognition markers and heat signatures, making themselves less identifiable to the hunting creatures. For 3 days, they fought their way back toward the original landing zone, hoping that at least one of the drop ships might still be operational. Their numbers dwindled steadily. On the 4th day, they were ambushed by the largest predator yet, a creature that moved through the canopy above, its massive form visible only as a displacement of light and shadow. It struck with tentacle-like appendages that phased through armor as if it were mist, extracting soldiers from formation with terrifying precision. In the chaos, Valerius pushed Zara out of the path of one such attack, only to be seized himself. Corvus watched in horror as his friend was pulled upward, the lieutenant's final act being to detonate his power core, sacrificing himself to wound the creature. The explosion temporarily disoriented the planetary defenses, allowing the survivors, now fewer than 300, to break through to the landing zone. What greeted them was devastating. The drop ships had been completely consumed, their metal frames transformed into bizarre organic structures that pulsed with the same light as the jungle. "It's assimilating our technology," Corvus realized aloud. "Learning from it." "Captain," Zara's voice drew his attention to the sky, where lights were descending through the clouds. "Reinforcements." But Corvus recognized the pattern of lights. Not drop ships, orbital bombardment. "Take cover," he roared, just as the first energy blast struck the jungle around them. The communicator at his hip suddenly crackled to life, Forlag's voice cutting through static. "Contaminated. Evidence of rebellion. Regrettable loss." Realization struck Corvus like a physical blow. Forlag wasn't trying to save them. He was eliminating witnesses, sterilizing the evidence of his catastrophic misjudgment. And with the high concentration of immortals at the landing zone, he could eliminate most of the survivors with precise strikes. Scatter, Corvus commanded. Back into the jungle. Now, the irony wasn't lost on him. Seeking safety in the environment that had been killing them, fleeing from their own empire's weapons. As they ran, the jungle responded to the orbital attack with unprecedented fury. The ground heaved, enormous growth formations erupted upward as if to shield itself, and the air filled with dense clouds of spores that began to form a reflective barrier against the energy weapons. The planet was defending itself on a massive scale now. Through the chaos, Corvus led the survivors deeper into the jungle, following a theory formed from Lyra's notes and his own observations. If the planet had a central consciousness, a heart as Lyra had called it, there might be blind spots, areas where awareness was weaker. Zara stayed close, having emerged as his most capable remaining officer. She'd adapted to Xylos faster than anyone, developing an almost intuitive sense for the planet's reactions. "Sir," she said as they paused in a relatively calm pocket of jungle, I think it's speaking to me." Corvus turned to her, alarmed. "What do you mean?" "In my dreams, I see patterns, connections. I think the spores are affecting my neural implants." She removed her helmet, revealing pupils dilated with bioluminescent specks. "I can feel where it wants us to go, and where it doesn't." "And where doesn't it want us to go?" Corvus asked cautiously. Zara pointed toward a distant mountain range visible through a break in the canopy. "There. Something important is there. Something it protects." Corvus hesitated. Trusting Zara's spore-influenced perceptions was dangerous. But conventional tactics had failed them utterly. Lead the way, he decided. For 2 more days they traveled, their numbers continuing to dwindle as Xylos threw increasingly sophisticated defenses at them. But with Zara's guidance, they avoided the worst areas, finding paths of lesser resistance. Finally, they reached the foothills of the mountains, where the vegetation thinned and changed character. Here, the plants grew in perfect geometric patterns, their structures more rigid, more purposeful. "This is it," Zara whispered. "The heart is near. I can feel its anxiety." They ascended through increasingly bizarre terrain, rock formations that couldn't have been formed naturally, vegetation that grew in mathematically perfect spirals. The air hummed with energy that made their remaining tech fluctuate wildly. At the summit, they found it, an enormous structure, part organic, part crystalline, pulsing with the same rhythm that had suffused the entire planet. Streams of luminescent fluid flowed through transparent conduits, carrying information or energy or both. And at its center, a chamber of perfect stillness, where a single massive crystal hovered in midair, its surface reflecting not their own images but visions of the entire planet, every ecosystem, every creature. The node, Corvus breathed, recognizing it from Lyra's description. The processing center of the planetary consciousness. As they approached, the crystal flickered, and suddenly they were surrounded by images, recordings, or memories. Corvus saw Lyra and her team, approaching the crystal with scientific curiosity rather than weapons. Attempting communication, being answered, and then figures in Cthar armor, but not Lyra's team, attacking the outer reaches of the node, attempting to extract samples of the crystal. The planetary response had been immediate and overwhelming. Xylos hadn't been defending itself from Lyra. It had been responding to an earlier, unreported Cthar incursion. One Forlag had conveniently omitted from all briefings. "It thinks we're all the same," Corvus realized. "It can't distinguish between different Cthar units." Zara stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the crystal's light. "It can learn," she said, her voice strange, distant. "It wants to understand." Zara, Corvus moved to pull her back, but it was too late. She had placed her hand on the crystal's surface. Light surged up her arm, enveloping her completely. For a moment, her body was translucent, filled with the same luminescence that permeated the jungle. Then the light receded, and she collapsed. Corvus caught her, expecting the worst, but her eyes opened. Normal again, the luminescent specks gone. "I showed it," she whispered. "I showed it we're different, that we understand now." Around them, the humming energy changed frequency, becoming less hostile, more curious. And then the mountain shook as an orbital strike hit nearby. Forelag was still hunting them. "We need to go," Corvus said. "Now." Zara shook her head. "Not that way." She pointed to a different path, descending the opposite side of the mountain. "This way. It will help us." True to her word, as they fled down the mountain, the jungle parted before them, creating a clear path. Behind them, the vegetation grew dense, blocking pursuit by any Kthar forces Forelag might have landed. At the base of the mountain, they discovered what Zara had somehow known was there, a small scout ship, partially overgrown but intact. Lyra's personal vessel. "She made it this far," Corvus said, examining the craft. "Was trying to return with the truth." Working frantically, the surviving immortals, now fewer than 50, cleared the vegetation and prepared the ship. It was designed for a small crew, not their numbers, but it was their only hope. As they worked, Zara grew increasingly distracted, staring into the jungle with an expression of mingled fear and resignation. "Captain," she finally said, "it's telling me something's coming. Something big." Corvus didn't need to ask what it was. The connection Zara had formed with Xylos was their greatest advantage now. "How long do we have?" "Not long. Hours, maybe." They redoubled their efforts, but progress was slow. The ship's systems had been compromised by Xylos' spores, requiring extensive repairs. And with each passing hour, they could feel the approaching threat, a pressure in the air, a rhythmic trembling of the ground. When night fell, they saw it, moving through the distant jungle, a colossal shape that dwarfed anything they'd encountered. Where it passed, the bioluminescence intensified 100-fold, creating a moving aurora of light that illuminated the clouds above. "It's the primary immune response," Zara whispered in awe. "The planet's ultimate defender." Corvus looked at the ship, still not ready, then at his remaining soldiers, exhausted and terrified, then back at the approaching Leviathan. "Keep working," he ordered. "I'll buy you time." "Sir," Zara protested. "That's an order, Sergeant," Corvus said firmly, checking his weapons. "Get them out of here. Get the truth back to the Empire." Before she could argue further, he moved away from the ship, toward the approaching entity. As he walked, he discarded pieces of his armor. The symbols of the Empire he had served so faithfully, now revealed to be corrupt and blind. He kept only his recording equipment. If he was to die, his final moments would serve as testimony. The entity sensed his approach and slowed. As Corvus drew closer, he could see it properly, a living mountain of intertwined organisms, acting as a single cohesive being. At its core, crystalline structures similar to the node pulsed with intelligence. Corvus activated his recorder and spoke his final log. "This is Captain Corvus of the Kthar Immortals. Xylos is not what we were told. It's not a world to be conquered. It's a singular organism, ancient and aware. We came as invaders, and it defended itself, as any living being would." He continued walking toward the entity, which had stopped completely, its countless sensory appendages focused on him. High Marshal Forelag knew this. He suppressed Lieutenant Lyra's findings and sent us to die. The Empire must know the truth. Xylos should be quarantined, studied respectfully from afar, not exploited. Its consciousness may be the most significant discovery in our history. Behind him, he heard the scout ship's engines sputtering to life. Good. They still had a chance. The entity before him shifted, parts of it reaching toward Corvus without quite touching him, as if studying this small being that approached alone, speaking. "I don't know if you can understand me." Corvus addressed the entity directly now, "but I wish to apologize. For my people, for myself. We acted in ignorance and fear." The ship's engines grew louder. The entity's attention began to shift toward the sound. "No!" Corvus shouted, firing his weapon into the air. "I'm your enemy. I'm the infection." The entity's focus returned to him, its massive form beginning to contract, preparing to eliminate the threat. Corvus closed his eyes, ready for the end. He heard the ship lifting off, accelerating away. And then nothing. He opened his eyes to find the entity still looming over him, but motionless. From within its crystalline core, a familiar luminescence emerged, taking shape before him. A crude approximation of a Cthar form, but recognizable. Lyra. Not the real Lyra, of course. A memory, a pattern extracted from her interactions with the node, given form by Xylos. The luminescent figure gestured toward the departing ship, then to Corvus, then to a different direction entirely, away from both the ship and the heart of Xylos. An escape route. Corvus understood. Zara's communication had worked. The planet was differentiating between Cthar individuals now, and it was offering him a chance. "Thank you," he whispered, then turned and ran in the indicated direction. Behind him, the entity pivoted with impossible speed, moving to intercept any pursuit from Forlag's forces, protecting both the escaping ship and Corvus's flight. Corvus ran for hours, following a path where vegetation parted before him and dangerous creatures turned away. Eventually, he reached what appeared to be another scout craft, smaller than Lyra's ship, partially hidden in a cave. An emergency evacuation vessel, prepositioned by the original reconnaissance team. Its systems were basic but intact, shielded from the spores by the unique mineral composition of the cave. Without hesitation, Corvus boarded it and initiated launch protocols. As the small craft rose through the atmosphere, he saw the full scope of Xylos' transformation. The entire continent where they had landed was now a seething mass of bioluminescent activity, visible even from space. And in orbit, the Imperator Draconis was engaged in battle, with Lyra's scout ship impossibly holding its own against the massive flagship, using maneuvers no Cthar pilot would attempt. Zara, Corvus realized, still connected to Xylos, somehow still fighting. He steered his vessel away from the conflict, plotting a random jump to escape the system. His craft was too small to intervene, but he could still complete the mission Zara had begun, to bring the truth to the wider empire. The jump engines engaged just as the Imperator Draconis launched a full barrage at Lyra's ship. The last image Corvus saw before the stars stretched into starlines was an explosion that could have been either ship's destruction. For months, Corvus drifted through space, his small craft limping between systems on minimal power. The spores that had infiltrated his body during his time on Xylos had changed him, creating a symbiotic relationship rather than destroying him. They sustained him when supplies ran low, healed injuries that should have been fatal. Eventually, he reached an independent trading post on the fringes of Cthar space, where he could send his testimony, the logs, Lyra's data, and his own experiences, anonymously to multiple sources throughout the Empire and to neighboring civilizations. He included a final warning. Xylos is not a world to be conquered. It is a power to be respected. The first Cthar incursion awakened it. The second provoked it. A third would unleash it beyond its boundaries. Let it remain undisturbed, a monument to our hubris and a testament to life's endless capacity to surprise us. The data package sent, Corvus retreated to a small, isolated settlement on a forgotten world, where he lived quietly, watching the stars each night. He never knew if Zara had survived, though sometimes he dreamed of her, luminescent patterns flowing beneath her skin as she moved through Xylos' jungles, no longer fully Cthar, not quite something else. Months later, reports reached even his isolated sanctuary. High Marshal Forlag was under investigation. The Tellurium X extraction program had been suspended. Xylos had been designated a forbidden zone, its coordinates classified at the highest level. And a new term had entered the military lexicon of the Cthar Empire, Deathworld, a designation for planets that were not to be approached under any circumstances. Planets that fought back. Corvus smiled grimly at the news. The truth had survived, even if the immortals had not. He alone had returned, changed but alive, carrying the warning that might save countless future lives. At night, In his dreams, he sometimes heard the resonant roar of Xylos, not threatening now, but watchful, waiting. And he wondered what other worlds like it existed out there in the dark between stars, patiently observing the creatures that skittered between them, planning their small conquests, unaware of the ancient consciousnesses they might awaken.